When you think of Apple, the company, what comes to your mind? Its annual launch events? Its iconic celebration of new iPhones? Or the beautiful landmarks at Apple Park? What if I tell you that none of these presentations matter for Apple's business? And in fact, there is something more fundamental. I think we can all agree that Apple is a great company. It invented modern computers in the 80s, changed the way we consume music, and with the iPhones, it changed our interface with the world in the most fundamental way.
And we are calling it iPhone. Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone. Here it is.
All you need is to take a subway to see how addicted people are nowadays to their smartphones. But how does Apple stay ahead of everyone year after year? Hey, before we start, if you like analysis in this video and are looking to understand more, I share them in my newsletter Disrupted, covering businesses and trends that matter. I want to reach out to the critical and smart people on this channel who have an insatiable curiosity for tech disruptions, just like me. It's launched only a week ago, and in fact, analysis in this video is live on the newsletter already. I can't wait for you guys to see it. Subscribe to it down below for free and get smarter with me today. First of all, Apple will never tell you their secrets. Here's how Apple presents its businesses to investors. The product section includes iPhones, iPads, Macs, and wearable devices. The services section comprises advertising, Apple Care, cloud services, digital content, and payment services. In addition, Apple wants its investors to know that it's making a lot of money and the growth of certain product lines is faster than ever. But the devils are always in the details. One number that gets casually thrown into the mix is Apple's gross margin. It says right here that Apple's margin is at 31.5% for its devices and 66% for its online businesses. Well, now we've got something interesting. In comparison, here is how one of Apple's biggest competitors, Xiaomi's annual report laying out their financial numbers of the year. For Xiaomi, they made 245 billion yuan in revenue and 36 billion in gross profits, meaning their gross margin, unlike Apple, is only 15%. Counterpoint research shows that Apple's business accounts for around 32% of the overall smartphone industry revenue, but 66% of overall profit. Well, this is a typical story of the smartphone industry, Apple eating everyone else's lunch. But it does give us the first clue of how Apple outperforms everyone and gets to keep more profit. But why? Tracing the history of the mobile market, something remarkable has happened over the last 15 years. Apple's profit margin has always been high, and in fact, it annihilated all of its competitors since 2005. Look at the market share numbers. Motorola, Sony Ericsson, Nokia, LG, these are dominant names in the early 2000s. But aside from Samsung, none of these brands survived Apple's onslaught. They either moved out of the market like LG or died. This makes Samsung's survival really interesting. Let me set the scene. The time was 2005 and the biggest player in the mobile market were Nokia, Samsung, Motorola, LG, and Sony Ericsson. They were doing fine until 2007 when Steve Jobs introduced the new iPhone.
The real magic comes when you use your finger on that thing. You scroll lists like by flicking like this, and it's like a roulette wheel. It goes stop like that. It's just so cool.
At first, people didn't understand what that meant. Some even laughed at the original iPhone.
$500 fully subsidized with a plan? I said, that is the most expensive phone in the world, and it doesn't appeal to business customers because it doesn't have a keyboard, which makes it not a very good email machine.
Then they scrambled for survival when their market share numbers started dropping in a free fall. But here's when things got interesting. Samsung, unlike everyone else, its market share improved. So what was the secret? It turns out Samsung has a tremendous hardware and supply chain advantage for critical smartphone components like LCD screens, RAMs, and processors. If you look at the original iPhone, you'd be surprised to find that all three of these critical components were supplied by Samsung. None of the other players had this combination of capabilities. I remember buying my first Nokia in the mid-2000s and my first iPod in 2010. Since then, I picked up 2 iPhones, 2 pairs of AirPods, and a few iPads. I'm in the ecosystem. But coming back to the key question, how does Apple stay on top? Well, now we have part of the answer. At least until 2012, it did so by creating a new market, partnering with critical suppliers like Samsung, and driving everyone else out. And because Apple was the leader from the beginning, it does not play by anyone else's rules. It gets to define them. But to stay competitive, continued long-term investment in the supply chain is key. That's why Apple is very protective of its supply chain. As Samsung became more powerful in the smartphone market, Apple took 3 years to invest in TSMC's chip production capability, and it dropped Samsung eventually in 2014. Many lawsuits were involved too. With the help of Apple, TSMC became the only OEM capable of producing 5nm chips today. Its stock price increased tenfold from 50 billion to 500 billion during the same period. So what was the lesson from Apple? If you stay in our supply chain and work with us, we'll prosper together. I'll invest in you and help you make powerful technology. But if you want to defy my control, you will lose customer and be prepared for lawsuits. We really shouldn't be surprised about Apple's supply chain obsession either. After all, that was what Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, was hired to do. He headed Apple's supply chain, oversaw Apple's investment into supply chain partners before becoming the chief operating officer and then CEO. So now we've established that Apple's success was based on its first mover advantage, driving out its competitors, and its incredible caution towards its supply chain. But that caution doesn't stop there. Apple, in fact, is obsessed with every aspect of its product. Since Apple gets to define the rules of the industry, it also never fails to abuse this power. For example, this is something that's forgotten. Face ID was not invented by Apple. In fact, Samsung and others launched similar features in 2012. Apple then showed the world Touch ID is more secure, and when Apple's competitor finally catches up and realized that Touch ID takes up too much space and put it at the back of the phone, Apple responds with Face ID. It's impossible to compete with someone who gets to change the rules. Apple is one such competitor. If we look at what Apple has done in recent years, it launched the ARM-based M1 chip to standardize its entire product lineup, and Apple is now openly working on Apple Car, which is, of course, will be running the same hardware and software. What does that mean? This means Apple is telling all of its competitors, if you want to compete with me, create your own chips, and by the way, you might want to start building a car too. The problem is, Apple is likely to have started working on M1 chip 5 years ago, and when it comes to the Apple Car, the project was started in 2014. So good luck catching up with Apple on short notice. This is a document that covers 200 top suppliers for Apple's supply chain. It tells a more intimate story of Apple's businesses. From Apple's assembly plant in China to its manufacturing facilities in Japan and to its testing centers in the United States, they work in concert to produce Apple's devices. Combining Apple's software ecosystem, Apple hires directly and indirectly over 2 million people in the US, 5 million in China, 2 million in the EU, and over 1 million in Korea and Japan. When an iPhone gets to our hands, it has gone through hundreds of processes and years of planning and shipping. This is the hardship that goes uncelebrated. Remember the profit margin we discussed earlier? That was the result of Apple's care and effort spent in the ecosystem. 10 million people have worked on the product before it reaches our hands, and 1 billion of us use an iPhone as of today. Tim Cook joined the company 10 years before the launch of an iPhone in 1998. He is the principal architect of Apple's supply chain, and it's safe to say, without him, Apple would be a different company. Tim Cook has built an incredibly efficient business. When looking into this subject of what helps Apple stay dominant in the smartphone industry, a question that puzzles me was that no matter how hard Xiaomi, Huawei, Oppo, Vivo tries, they always seems to be miles away from Apple. Apple is like this kid in school who tops class every time. When tracing through Apple's history for this video, I suddenly realized Apple is not the student who competes to get to the top spot. Apple is the teacher who sets the exams. And quite literally, Apple is the company that pioneered the smartphone industry and the idea of a software-hardware ecosystem. Every step of the way, Apple made the right decisions, investing early in its industry partners, keeping iOS closed, and building the Apple car. As long as Apple is the one setting the rules rather than following it, I guess Apple will never fall behind, will it?